Hello internet friends, Chris Masto here with another NSPanel ESP Home Assistant video. But before I dive right into everything, I just want to say I am absolutely blown away by the response that I got to the video I put up the other day about this thing. You are all amazing. The subscriptions, the likes, the comments, the feedback, all the positive things people have said, it is truly amazing. I had no expectation of this video doing so well. And I would like to repay that by continuing to make more videos on similar topics and other topics that hopefully people will also find interesting. This one here is about dimming the screen. I'm learning along with you. As I figure things out, I'm going to share them with the community and we can learn and we can figure this stuff out together. I did put some resources on the previous video, so definitely go check that stuff out because I'm not the guy here. I'm just somebody who likes to share my enthusiasm for this stuff. And just one more thing before we get started, I wanted to show you these 3D printed stands here because I'm kind of proud of myself. When you're working on this thing and it's across the room on the wall or it's even in a different room, it can be kind of inconvenient. Since these things pop right off the wall and come off their base, I figured it would be nice to be able to take it over to the computer temporarily, put it on a stand, plug it in, work on it, and then you can bring it back when you're done making all your changes. So that's what that is. I designed these in Fusion 360 and 3D printed it, and it's a nice stand there that you can set the thing on. And once I finished this one, I realized that I'm actually mounting this landscape rather than portrait, so I did another one that is just allows you to put it in the horizontal or vertical orientation. And if I just take this off here, it just sits on there. There's a little lip for it, and of course a hole that fits exactly where that thing sticks out from it, and you can attach 5 volts and ground to it, and then just thread the wire through the back, and the thing sits on there, and you're good to go. Very easy to press the buttons and take it back apart and remount it to the wall afterward if you want. The STLs and the Fusion 360 model are available on Thingiverse. There's a link in the description of this video if anybody happens to find these useful. They are sized for the US version, but the model is parametric, so it should be relatively straightforward to change it to work for the European version if that's what you want. Anyway, let's move on now to the actual subject of this video, which is dimming these screens. As always, I will make the files I'm using available on GitHub, and I'll provide a link in the video description below. Extending the demonstration from the previous video, I created an HMI here with a few buttons and some text on it. The problem with this is that it's on all the time, and you're probably not in the room all the time, and even when you are, you don't really need this to be lit up all the time. Some screens out there have motion sensors built into them so that they'll light up when you walk up to them, which is great. This one does not. You could add an external motion sensor, but then of course you'd have to find someplace to put it. It's probably not going to fit inside of this box. That's a perfectly good solution, but it's not what I'm demonstrating in this video. I want to show you something that you can just do with what's built into this display. Speaking of what's built into this display, it's supposed to have an automatic sleep mode. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work for reasons that we haven't been able to figure out. We can't use that, so we're just going to implement our own. I like to show tips and tricks along the way, so I'm going to do a few things here that are not exactly related to dimming, but I have found them to be helpful. The first thing is that I want to add a new service. So if I go over to ESP Home, there's a section in here where we define Home Assistant services. We have 2 of them. There's one that plays a song, and there's one that lets you upload a new TFT file. I'm going to add a third one today, which is to be able to send an arbitrary command to the Nextion screen. So the way this one will work is it'll take the command as a variable. So we'll put here variables, command string, and then what it'll execute here is a lambda, which will take that string and call this method. I can't talk and type at the same time, so let me get this in and then we'll talk about it. I want to do that, and then I want to take the string and convert it from a C++ string to a C string, and that should do it. Okay, yeah, so this takes a string as an argument, and it calls send command printf, which lets you pass an arbitrary string to the Nextion display. So if you look up the things in the Nextion instruction set that you can do, Nextion has this document that explains all of the different commands that you can send to their screens and what they do, and this will allow you to execute them easily when you're experimenting. The other thing I want to do is add a second button. We have this restart button here, which is, as it says, a reboot button is always useful. But another thing that would be useful is to be able to update the TFT easily without having to go to the service screen. So I'm going to add a button here to be able to do that. So we can use the template platform like that, and then we just give it some name here. So let's call it device name TFT upload. And this is going to be a different device class, so it has a different icon in Home Assistant. And what we simply want to do is say when that button is pressed, we are going to, again, use this same lambda that we used here on line 43 to upload the TFT. We'll do the same thing when this button is pressed. Just like that. So now we have those two new features. I'm going to install them and we can move on to the next part. So now over here under controls, we have a new option, Demo NSPanel TFT Upload. And if I click that, it would do the TFT upload process. The other thing I have is over in services, I should now be able to find send command. And then I can type any arbitrary command here into this box and execute it on the display. So for example, I could say dim equals 5, which will dim the screen. And when I click send command, it does it. And similarly, I can brighten it back up. Or, and this is important for what we're doing today, we can discover that dim equals 0 actually turns it right off, which is super convenient when we're trying to turn the screen off. And since I like 25 as a normal brightness in this room, basically what I want to do with this is I want to have it set to a brightness of 25 as long as you're interacting with it. If you stop touching it for a while, it should go blank. And then if you touch the screen again, I want it to come back on. I also want it to come back on if you use the two buttons. And an important part of that is when you touch the screen to turn it back on, I don't want you to accidentally activate a button. So those are kind of my requirements here. Let's see how we can implement those. Back in the Nextion editor, let's do one thing at a time. First, we can add a timer. And the timer has a couple settings over here on the right side where you can control, for example, how long it takes to kick in. I would probably set it to something like 30 seconds, which is 30,000 here. It's in milliseconds. But for the purpose of demonstration, I'm going to set it to 3 seconds just to make it kick in faster. The other thing we'll be using is the enable attribute. When this is set to 1, the timer starts counting down. And when you reset it to 1, it resets the timer. Let's also set the name of the timer while we're here. Call it sleep timer. And here in the timer event box is where we actually write the code that runs when the timer hits 0. So let's do the thing. Turn screen off, dim equals 0, since we know that does that. And then I think you need to turn the timer off or it keeps repeating. So let's go ahead and set sleep timer enable to 0 at that point. Now that covers turning the screen off after 3 seconds. We can test that here with the simulator and see if it works. Even though the simulator is not perfect, it should be able to simulate this part. There we go. So after 3 seconds, it says simulator has very low brightness, BL0, and it's turned off. But the problem is you can't turn it back on. So we need to fix that. One of the problems with Nextion is you don't get very far before you have to resort to some kind of hackery. And this is what I would definitely call hackery. What I'm going to do here is overlay the entire thing with a big button. The idea is that when we turn the screen off, we'll display this button that covers the entire screen. When somebody touches the screen, they'll hit this button, and this button will then turn the screen back on and hide itself. It's kind of weird, but it's the best way I've come up with to do this. The other thing about this, and somebody will probably call me out on this because I didn't check, but just because you turn the screen backlight off doesn't necessarily stop displaying things on the screen. It just makes it very dark. So if you want to avoid screen burn-in, it's not a bad idea to blank out the screen completely. And if we make this button here black then we can make sure that when the button is being displayed that there's nothing on the screen. So I'm setting the background color to black. I'm removing the text since we're not using any text here. Let's also call this wake button so we can refer to it. And now we've got this button all set up. Of course, if we run this now, then we're not going to be able to see anything on the screen because it's completely covered up. So let's write a touch release event on the wake button that actually wakes up the screen and hides the button. We can do this here. Turn screen back on. Dim equals 100 in this case. And then we can say hide the wake up button. Viz is the command that hides or shows something. So we can say viz wake button, comma 0, and that will make it invisible. And then we also want to reset our timer so that we get another 30 seconds or 3 seconds or whatever it's set to. So we can say sleep timer.enable equals 1. So when you tap on this button, screen goes to full brightness, button disappears, and the timer gets re-enabled. So we can test this a little bit just to make sure that clicking on the button does make it go away. So I'm going to click here, and the button did in fact become invisible. But the screen still blanks out and we still can't re-enable it because the button is invisible, and when the sleep timer kicks off, it's not enabling the button. So we want to put this in here, which would be, we can say show wake up button. And in this case, we'll say viz wake button, comma 1. So that does the opposite. The button hides itself, the timer shows it. And now if we go into debug here, I always like to try things a little bit at a time. So I can click there, the button goes away. It should come back in 3 seconds. Click there again, button goes away. And this time the screen is dimming and brightening along with the button. So the backlight is at 100 now, and then it goes to 0. And when I click here, it comes back to 100. So we're getting somewhere. We're still missing a couple of features. First of all, it starts up in the wrong state. So when I run the debugger, we don't want the screen to start out with that big button over everything. Unfortunately, as far as I know, there is no default visibility setting here in the attributes, but what you can do is on the page. So if I set this selector here to page, or just click here in the background, there's a post initialize event where you can write code that runs right after the page is initialized. And in here we can just basically say, we could say that we want to make the button invisible, but we could also just run, since this button has this code here that sort of does all the things, why don't we just take advantage of that and use that code? So we can actually just say click wake button, comma, see how they have a release event is 0 and press event is 1. So in this case, I've got the code for the wake button on the release event. And so I'm going to make sure that this code says click wake button, comma 0. So basically this acts like when the page is displayed, it automatically clicks the button. So when I click debug here now, it should start up with that button invisible. And it also makes sure that the timer is running and the screen is set to the correct brightness. And then after 3 seconds, it goes blank. If I click again, it comes back. And after 3 seconds, it goes blank. So we're getting somewhere. The only problem here is that if I'm interacting with these things, it's still running the timer. So I definitely don't want this to just suddenly go off while I'm using it, which is what it's doing now. So we can fix that with another hack. We can add a thing here called a touch cap, which is an object that just receives all of the touch events and allows you to process them. So even though the other buttons are being pressed by the user and they're being acted upon, this touch cap component will also get those touch events, and you can do stuff with it too. So we'll call this, let's just call this screen touch. And all we need to do here is reset the sleep timer. So we'll just say sleep timer dot n equals 1. And so that means every time anything on this page is touched, it'll call this code and it'll give us a new 3 seconds. So let's go to debug now, and what we should see is that as long as I'm interacting with these things, it's not going to go blank. So I can be clicking here, I can even be clicking in the background, I don't have to be clicking on the buttons themselves. So though you can't see it, I'm clicking all around here. And then if I stop clicking for 3 seconds, 2, 1, goes blank. And then because it's being covered by this big button that you can't see, when you click on that, it wakes it back up again. And then again, if I keep interacting with it, it will keep it alive. So we're pretty much there. I want to add one more tiny refinement here, which is that we are setting the screen to 100 when we wake it back up. Wouldn't it be nice if we saved and restored the current brightness of the screen? We can do that with a variable here. So I'm going to create a variable and call it brightness. We might as well make this global because brightness is not specific to a page. And now what we can do is, before we change the screen's brightness to 0, we can save the old value. We can do that by saying brightness.value equals dim. And this will store the current value of dim into the brightness variable. Then, when we go to wake the screen back up, instead of setting dim equal to 100, we can just set dim equal to brightness.value. We just need to make sure that when we start this up, the initial value of our brightness variable is not 0, otherwise it'll save 0 in that variable and it won't make any sense. So let's run the simulator and see what we see. So it should be working just like before. It's toggling between 100 and 0, but if, while it's still awake, I'm going to type this here and get it ready. So let's say we want our dim to actually be 50. So I'm going to wake it up, set the brightness to 50, and now when it goes to sleep, it should remember that it was at 50, and when I wake it up again, it'll go back to 50 instead of going back to 100. So now it's maintaining the brightness while asleep, which is convenient. That's everything we need in our HMI. Now there is one thing here which is really frustrating, of course. This button is covering the entire user interface, so if you want to work on it, you have to move this thing out of the way and then do whatever you're going to do and then put it back. But that's the workaround for now. So let's save our file, output our TFT, and then try it out on the actual device. Now remember, I added this button here in Home Assistant, so I no longer have to go and find the service. I can just click this button and it'll update the TFT. And the screen went blank, which is what we wanted. And if I tap on it, it comes back, which is what we wanted. So I can press these buttons here, and that should keep the screen alive if I keep interacting with it. And then if I stop, it goes off. So that's almost perfect. The only thing that's missing from this is I would like the screen to come back on if I use these physical buttons, and that's not happening. So let's do that. So remember that we have the ability to pretend that we clicked the wake button by sending the click command to the screen. So all we really have to do is go into our binary sensor buttons here, and we can just add an on release trigger, which runs a lambda. That calls send command printf. And in this case, the command we want to send is hard-coded. It's going to be click wake button, comma, 0. Just like we were doing in the editor. And we'll add that to both buttons here and save and install. And after this thing boots up, we should see it working. Okay, so let's wait a few seconds and let the screen go off, and then if I press one of these, it turns back on. Make sure it works for the other one as well. And then also, if we happen to be using these buttons, it will also keep the screen on, because when we're calling that wake button, it's also resetting the timer. So any interaction with this will keep it alive, and when you stop touching it, the screen will go off a few seconds later. Naturally, for real world usage, I would go back in and change this timer from 3 seconds to 30 seconds, and that's it. Everything will be done at that point. So I hope you found this information useful. Like I said, I'm learning along with everybody else. One obvious downside that occurs to me is I don't know what I'm going to do if I add a second page to this. That big dim button lives on one page. A lot of the stuff on Nextion is page specific, so I don't know if you have to just copy and paste everything on every page or if there's a way to kind of optimize that. If anybody knows and can figure it out, please do leave a comment down below or on one of the forum threads. Otherwise, I'll probably be figuring that out next weekend, and if I do, I'll be sure to share it with everybody. If you do like this stuff and you haven't done so already, I would appreciate it if you subscribe, and do check out the links below the video for the community forums and other places, as well as links to the code for everything I just showed and the models for the 3D printing. Really appreciate everyone out there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.